Although all leaders will face difficulties, there are some unique challenges for women preachers and leaders in the church. Today, I chatted with Dr. Amy Orr-Ewing, an international author, speaker, and theologian, about the challenge of finding your voice and leading authentically as a woman. Amy is the author of multiple books, including Lead Like the Real You and Mary's Voice, Advent Reflections to Contemplate the Coming of Christ. Over the last 25 years, Amy has spoken in 40 countries, including public lectures and open forums on university campuses, as a broadcaster on TV and radio, and addressing politicians and parliamentarians at the UK Parliament and staffers on Capitol Hill in the West Wing of the White House. Amy speaks about how theology connects with the deepest questions of life, and I know you'll appreciate her insight and authenticity. Hi, Amy. Welcome to the Roots for Churches podcast. Great to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about women in ministry, women and preachers, and you've written a book recently on that topic. We just start off with what do you think are some of the unique challenges that women face when it comes to preaching?
Yeah, so thank you. My book, Lead Like the Real You, is a book aimed at women leaders in all kinds of sectors, but the first few letters, it's letters format, written from me, a woman in midlife, to next generation, really based on the idea of what would it have been helpful to know 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And yeah, the first sort of section of letters is all about kind of public communication. And it struck me that I've been working professionally as a public theologian for 25 years, kind of giving lectures and talks and all over the world and in conferences and all sorts of settings. But I didn't ever really have much formal or, I guess, even much kind of intentional input into shaping my voice. And one of the roles that I've had in teaching over the years is teaching preaching and communication. I noticed that there are kind of particular challenges that women face. Some of them are cultural, but some of them are actually physiological. So, for example, the studies show that it's in the first 30 seconds that listeners decide whether they're going to engage with what someone speaking is saying. And that would be true whether you're addressing a kind of meeting of 5 people at work or standing up in front of 5,000 people. Like, you have really that first 30 seconds quite critically to capture your audience and make that connection so that people are listening. But another study shows, and actually all our kind of anecdotal evidence as well, shows that people find sounds in the higher tonal register less engaging, more annoying than in the lower tonal register, which is why famously Margaret Thatcher, had the sort of speech lessons that she had and brought her voice lower to be more commanding and have authority. And then other studies show that when we're nervous, our voices go a bit higher. So what all of that adds up to is that in very practical terms, you have 30 seconds to make that initial critical engagement with an audience. As a woman, your voice is likely to go up if you're feeling nervous, just when that's very annoying and you're trying to connect with an audience. So on a totally practical level, one of the things I would teach all women that I'm teaching, to preach or publicly communicate, is to memorize your first 30 seconds and to really polish it, to think about your body language as well as your actual words, because your face and your body also speak, to take a deep breath and consciously bring your voice down to its natural tonal register rather than a few octaves or, a few tones higher than where it would be if you were nervous. Not to hesitate and to really just go in those first 30 seconds. And actually, that's, if you make a good start, often, adrenaline carries you a little bit and you do a much better job for the rest of the 20 minutes or however long you're talking to. So some of it's really practical. I think there are other kind of cultural questions that women face. For example, I don't think I've ever spoken anywhere and not at some point had someone comment on either something I'm wearing, my shoes, or my hair, something related to my appearance, usually complimentary, which is fine. But I don't know any men who've ever had anyone comment on, their shoes, what they're wearing, or their haircut.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that as embodied women, when we're publicly communicating, our appearance is being factored in by people. And so you just need to think practically about what suits you, what you're not going to massively sweat in. Obviously, as we get older, that's an issue anyway. What's kind of, comfortable that we can move in easily, but also respectful to the inviting parties. Like if you're doing quite a high profile event or a carol service or whatever, and you're not robing, you're not clergy, thinking about being respectful. I always wear or bring heeled shoes with me because very often the podium in a university or in a business or even in a church I'm only 5'5", so it will block my face. Whereas if I've got that extra little bit of height, you can make that eye contact with people. So yeah, that's
very
just a few
practical, isn't
practical
it?
things. But
Yeah, but the world isn't designed for women to stand behind a podium,
Exactly. Or if you wear a dress with no pockets. So for example, often a business dress is not a thing with a belt. You might wear something without a belt or pockets. If you're not wearing trousers, there's nowhere for the sound pack to hook onto.
Yeah, so you might.
All sorts of practical things to think about.
Yes, that men's clothes is already cleverly designed for them.
Yeah.
It's not fair, is it? And are there particular bad habits that you've noticed? Not that we want to call anybody out, but I mean, I notice that women tend to apologise or tend to almost seek permission before they speak. Even when we're preaching, we just say, well, I have a little thing I just want to share, which you're immediately downplaying the, importance or authority that you've got. Have you noticed other sort of habits that women tend to do that our culture probably coaches us to do it, but we should probably avoid if we could?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is that women often draw illustrations and examples from the domestic sphere or from their children or children that they know. And that on one level, there's nothing wrong with that. But it is annoying if you don't ever speak to the vast majority of people's actual life that you're talking to. And you're kind of reinforcing stereotypes about women that can be unhelpful to either the women who are in a peculiarly kind of domestic phase of life, maybe with young children at home and they're working part-time or not in paid employment, but also to all those other women who are leading in really interesting ways and reading interesting books and, don't want to be defined in that way. Or, so that would be one. I think another one might be that as women, sometimes, this can go one of two ways. I have often been in a situation where I've been the first woman allowed to address a particular conference or audience. And there can be the reaction to that can be that you're so sort of self-effacing and so conscious of not offending anyone that you're kind of what Beth Moore calls putting your flat shoes on so as not to overwhelm anyone. Or the other way it can go is that you are so conscious that you're representing 50% of the population, and this is the one shot for that 50% that you have to do a kind of spectacular job, that you're kind of a bit over prepared and, maybe sort of dazzling people with your competence in a way that comes across as not authentic. So I've definitely seen those things. I think sometimes women who are a bit shy or a bit nervous, that comes through in quite obvious ways in body language, whether it's sort of shrinking away or, it's just your sort of body stance isn't kind of open and confident or welcoming. And just doesn't set other people at ease. So people feel, that nervousness is then communicated to others. So yeah, those would be a few.
And it sounds like all of this is about finding your voice, finding your authority and your confidence. And that is a journey that we all go on as leaders, whether you're male or female. But it feels far more contested for women, that you already feel like you're sort of on the back foot, or you have the imposter syndrome sort of thing going into it. I mean, the part of this book that you've written is you addressing those sort of inner battles of, do I deserve this seat at the table? Do I deserve this place? And how do I find my voice? Obviously, people should go and buy the book. But do you have any sort of short ways into that, of like ways that you would encourage people? How do we stop being our own worst enemy in our leadership? How do we find that confidence to show up and be fully ourselves and embodied?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive issue. And again, I share the anecdote in the book. I read this in the newspaper, but it's when Queen Elizabeth II was still alive, and she hosted a function at Buckingham Palace for outstanding women who contributed to British society. And she had musicians and Olympic athletes and writers and academics and, people who'd worked on sort of scientific breakthroughs, and, a really lovely range of just amazing, talented, accomplished women. And the journalist who was sent to cover this noticed a sort of quite interesting phenomenon, which was that every conversation she either was present for or kind of overheard, almost every woman began by saying, "Oh, I don't know why I'm here. Of course, you're so amazing, but not sure why I'm here." Well, possibly because you invented the vaccine for whatever, or, you're a best-selling author or whatever it was. But she reflected afterwards that she could not imagine a group of high-achieving men having been invited to Buckingham Palace that a single one would have begun their conversation with that phrase. So I think part of it is knowing and understanding that this is a phenomenon that is not just unique to us as individuals. So, I've often had the conversation with my husband's been an extraordinary sort of encouragement and support to me throughout. And I've often had conversations if I've been invited to, I don't know, some high level round table or whatever it is, speak in a political setting, and you sort of think, well, I'm not sure I can do it, or why me? And he would sort of say, well, probably because here are your qualifications, and here, like, just give data, not like an ego boost, a kind of like factual reminder that, there's evidence as to why you're being invited to do this. And that's not so that we can become, and obviously none of us want to be proud, but it isn't humility, on the other hand, to erase ourselves. And Jesus doesn't require us to do that. It's really interesting to me that the contributions of women are noted in the New Testament and underscored. And it's not like, well, they might get proud if they were written about in the Bible. No, it's the female disciples in Luke 8 who paid for everything. And here are some of their names. And, here are the names of the women who did not abandon Jesus with all the male disciples and were actually the witnesses to the crucifixion. So it's like, it's not humility. It's problematic to listen to that voice kind of counting us out. And obviously, an extreme form of it is imposter syndrome. That's a kind of psychological phenomenon where, but we use that in a popular level speech to describe this feeling of, am I really qualified enough? Can I really do this? The answer to that isn't always yes. There are some things that we should probably say no to because, we've not got the gifts or the track record or whatever, and get someone else to do it. But in the vast majority of cases, the answer is yes, you can do this, and you should, and God is calling you to do it, and you need to show up. So
yeah. And God often calls us, so when it's a little bit beyond us, so he can fill us.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I think women tend to want to be overqualified or want to be overprepared, as you say, sort of show up completely glowing, and there's something great about being prepared and qualified and knowing your stuff, but there is the space for God to fill the gap and for us to take risks of faith, and you're going to have a first time of doing everything, aren't you? So you can't be experienced at everything. We need to be able to try and learn and make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And if they're going to ask a guy to do it, he may not be as qualified as us, but might be more willing to have a go.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, that's often the case.
Yeah.
But we need to be talked into things. Yeah.
And so obviously you've written this book, and it's about helping women find their voice. And I feel like in this sort of fight for women's empowerment, we've often done this thing of, but leadership isn't gendered. Leadership shouldn't be only men can do this and women can do it. Leadership itself isn't gendered. But are there things that you think women particularly excel at in terms of leadership and preaching that is unique to women that we should lean into and sort of push into that strength?
So I would be hesitant to say that there are sort of strengths that all women have, because obviously we are all different, and I would sort of hesitate to put stereotypes on things, because, for example, one stereotype would be that men tend to be more kind of rational and thinking and women more emotive. But I work in apologetics and, have kind of led in that area. And admittedly, it's a very, very male dominated area, but it's something that I've really thrived in, and just encouraging people to use their minds. So I would be a little bit hesitant, but I think there are superpowers that we can bring as women, potentially, if we really kind of work on them and think about them in a way that is unique, because we are embodied women. So, there are particular types of suffering that only women experience, whether that's related to our menstrual cycle or some other way of being embodied as women. And that can give us tremendous empathy, but also a kind of vulnerability that can be quite powerful in speaking, actually. If we do it in a way that is safe for our audience, to speak with just a knowledge of what the lived experience of a survivor of sexual assault or sexual abuse is. Even if we haven't experienced that ourselves, but we've walked with people who have, as women, we know what it is to be frightened as we walk on a dark street, because we could quite easily be attacked at any moment. And we've all grown up experiencing that, living that. And so we can speak into anxiety and fear in a way that most men can't. Similarly, women who've had the experience of either miscarriage or birth, there's a whole load of imagery and metaphor connected to that. So yes, I think there are areas that are either particular strengths for us, but I would also want to be careful about gender stereotypes and not shutting off whole areas because we're women that have been more classically open to.
It's really interesting. And so let's talk more generally about women in leadership. What's encouraging you at the moment about women in leadership? Are there things that are changing, or you're seeing breakthroughs, or women sort of standing in things that maybe we didn't have before?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when I was sort of starting out in the late 90s, early 2000s, if I was speaking somewhere, I was usually the only woman and or the first woman. And now that is definitely not the case. There are a lot more women kind of visibly operating. And actually, in some contexts, it's kind of gone the other way. It's like, we actually need to create space for young men to really thrive. And one of the things I love doing is teaching and raising up young men as well, because I think men can raise up women and women can raise up men too.
Yeah.
Like if we really believe in female leadership, we want to empower actually everyone. And we're getting closer to the spot where there are plenty of women now, operating in leadership roles. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't areas of difficulty and challenge. And, there are sectors of the church where that is harder than other sectors. But I think it's, I'm 48, and, when I was 23, I didn't know of any women doing anything like what I do now, let alone sort of, women leading churches or whatever. And I just don't think that would be the case now for 23-year-olds. And so, yeah, there are definitely challenges, but actually seeing role models isn't one of them. And I think that's an encouragement.
Yeah, and I think there's more diversity of role models. Before you had the pioneers, and I think sometimes you had to be quite persistent and really committed to be the pioneer. You might maybe had to put your armor on to get through some of these situations, whereas some of those ceilings have been broken through, and that you don't have to be quite so armored and so tough to be a woman in those settings. You don't have to play like the boys. You can be a bit more authentically feminine in your leadership, whatever that actually means
for you. Yeah, exactly.
But it does feel like it is changed, and there's a variety of role models, which I find really encouraging. I think it's quite interesting, sort of culturally, sort of if we step outside of the church, that feminism is changing and morphing. It felt like you can talk about, first wave, second wave, third wave feminism, that we're aware of, like these were the no-go areas, and we've sort of felt like we knocked some barriers down. But now culture is sort of wondering what does it really mean to be a woman. And I took my daughter to watch the musical Six, and it's this sort of feminist play about the wives of Henry VIII. But I kind of came at the end and I was like, is there really a role model in all of this? Like this sort of desire to retell history from the female point of view. It felt a bit flat and sad by the end. And I just thought this sort of empowerment didn't feel, I don't know, positive in some way. And I'm just aware of like the Barbie movie and that sort of famous speech at the end where Gloria sort of talks about this crisis of femininity, of like you've got to be soft and beautiful, but also powerful and a leader, and sort of everybody wanting something from you, and it feels like this impossible task to be both this amazing leader and ambitious, but also soft and a team player. Yeah, I sometimes I do wonder, like, have we set ourselves as women an impossible task as leaders, that we're trying to be all things to all people? And so, yeah, I'm enjoying your book because I feel like, I can come back to what has God called me to be. But I do think there is this slight overwhelm in women who lead, that I'm trying to keep all the plates spinning. I'm trying to keep everybody happy. And so have you got any sort of reflections on?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, yeah. The plate spinning thing is really interesting. I mean, I think if you're going to pick out one thing, other than the embodied differences, like the differences that, obviously I believe biological sex exists as a real category, that to be a woman is an embodied, immutable reality, same as to be male. And so we could talk about it from a sort of scientific biological point of view. And then we could talk about, embodied women's experiences. But if you were to like gun to my head, say, what are the other differences really between men and women? I think one of the observable differences is that, the woman sort of multitasker, plate spinner. And I don't necessarily think that's connected to motherhood. I think it's really useful for motherhood. But obviously not all women are going to be mothers, but there's this seemingly connection between being female and being able to do a lot more than one thing at once. And that also has a dark side to it that we don't often, talk about. You've brought it up though, and that's the kind of stress that goes along with that, and the pressure to kind of do it all. I mean, I wrote a book on Mary, the mother of Jesus, called Mary's Voice, and I begin it by really reflecting on, it's an Advent book, and really reflecting on how particularly for women in the run up to Christmas, there's just all this, what the sociologists call emotional labor. So it is women that tend to facilitate the social gatherings of social networks, whether that's extended family or, groups of couples and friends or groups of single friends. Any gathering of people, you will find behind it all women making it happen, thinking of it, doing the inviting, making the reservations, organising the decorations, whatever, doing all the communication. And they're doing that whilst also caring for their families, whether that's caring for older parents or if they have children, caring for children. And then you've also got women now really operating in the public square, in businesses and in workplaces up and down the country. And so I would say that there's a sort of joy in it. And if you can read Proverbs 31 one of two ways. You can read it and think, my word, how overwhelming to be the ideal woman. Or you can read it and think, wow, the Bible's ideal of this sort of feminine character is this multifaceted woman who operates at many dimensions. Yes, her children rise up and call her blessed. Yes, her husband respects her, but she's also operating in business and she's engaging in scholarship and she fears the Lord. She has a deep spiritual life. And she has good arms, it says her arms are strong, no bingo wings. And she's got like nice linen. She's got her bed linen sorted and good clothes. And it's like, wow, where's the sort of dowdy frump of our imaginations of a kind of deeply spiritual woman? So there's this vision of a kind of holistic life, which I find appealing. But at the same time, you're right. The potential to be overwhelmed by all the demands in modern life on women is real, and it's real in the church as well.
And I wonder if there's that, I don't know if women are more pro-social, like more important. I'm sure this is true of many men, but that they sort of need to be part of the bigger group and to keep everybody happy or to manage the relationships. Because I do think there is that need or an awareness of what everybody else is thinking. Whereas I think that male leadership is often do what's right, kind of forget about the crowd, or stand and deliver your thing and be a man of integrity. And what does a woman of integrity look like? Is that different? And I think it isn't, but culturally it is. Like culturally, there's a different sort of set of expectations that means that we are trying not only to do the right thing, but also to bring everybody with us in a way that they will like us and respect us. And I think men want to do that as well. But that sort of whole trying to hold everybody together and bring them with us and keep everybody happy, I think that leads to that overwhelm that women can have.
Yeah. I also think that for women, there's a sort of punishment for excellence. So the number of women I know that lead teams or, have, I don't know, been successful in politics or the law or whatever. And, because they work hard and sort of deliver, there's this implication that you're making your team feel bad.
Right.
By comparison. It's so interesting, honestly. That's quite a kind of common theme too. And I don't think men who excel experience that in the same way.
Yeah.
Like tall poppy syndrome is a thing, but it's especially a thing for women.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's that achieve and look great, but make sure that everybody's with you and on the same level so you don't stand out.
Yeah. Make sure that yes, everyone's with you and that no one feels bad that their level wasn't necessarily your level, even though you've been doing it 10 years longer than them, or whatever.
Don't show anyone up.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So together we need to disband this because it will kill us, won't it? It's exhausting emotionally, that sort of trying, because we've got to do our best and bring our best to God, do as much as we can. But without doing it in a way that is totally unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I think I also, so one of the things I like to talk about a lot with women is the idea of seasons. So, when you're talking to a woman at a particular season in life, let's say in her 20s, feeling a bit overwhelmed, and you think, well, there's time in your life to gain experience and to get qualifications and to dig deeper and to, put the work in so that the foundation of your career and professional life is really there. So you're not always bootstrapping. You're not always like the teacher in the first year. You've got to do every lesson plan from scratch. By year 2 or 3 or whatever, you're kind of more established. And or the women who's married and got a young family, well, your kid isn't going to be a toddler forever. So there's a particular need level that your children have when they're younger, but at some point they will go to university or leave home and find a job or whatever. And at that point, you may well have 20, 30 years of working life ahead of you, particularly if, the trends for longevity continue, this 100-year life idea that people are going to be working to 80. I know. But actually, that's really exciting, isn't it? If your kids leave home, like my twins have gone to university and I'm not 50 yet, right? So I've got decades of my professional life, God willing, obviously we could be, get a disease and die younger or accident or whatever. But if that doesn't happen, there are seasons when I can work at a different rate and a different pace. When, the smaller things I've put in the bank in the previous 25 years, all of that study and preparation and prayer, all of those pastoral conversations and all of that showing up faithfully, all of that hospitality and washing up and preparing meals for people, like it's part of that fruit, making you a fruitful tree, it's going into that character formation, which will have an impact on ministry and preaching. I was talking to someone who was on maternity leave just a few weeks ago, and she was sort of saying to me, she worked in Christian ministry and she's going to go back part-time. She says, I'm sort of like, I wonder if I'll have forgotten everything. And I said, I remember exactly feeling that and articulating and saying that to people. But when I first preached again after having my twins and coming back from maternity leave, loads of people said, you've gone up a level. There's another level. And it wasn't, anything other than you've had all these sleepless nights. You've been through this kind of life-changing, body-changing, near-death experience. And somehow some of that life, showing up and doing faithful things in life, even really mundane things like changing nappies at 2 a.m. for 6 months, that then shows up in your communication in a different way. So to just encourage us that no woman has it all the time, but we have some of it, some of the time, and it's a cumulative thing, like we're called to a life, right? And so it's about faithfulness in the season we're in. And I think one of the things we can do is just wish that away. We can think, when I get married, or when I don't know, this is paid off, or when I finally have that baby I've been longing for, or when, my child is at school, or whatever it is, then ... But no, God's calling us to now, to faithfulness in the season we're in now. And then season builds upon season, upon season, upon season. That's why old women are so beautiful.
They are. And I think, as you said, that thing about the change in you after having babies, I think it comes into that authentically embodying yourself, like being in your own body and being a bit more comfortable with who you are and kind of owning some of your authority. And there will be things that knock us as well. So some of these things that we go through, we find more of ourselves and we can express it more. And even if we don't feel like we're actually articulating it, as you say, it just comes out in the authority and the way that we speak and communicate, the way we empathize. there will be things that knock us. There will be situations that really bury our confidence and take us sideways. And I wonder if you can speak to that, because I know you've put a bit of that in the book. There are situations that really no leader wants to go through, and you think, how did I not see this coming? What do I do now?
Yeah.
How do we regain our voice after those moments?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that can happen. Obviously, that happens at different levels for different ones of us at different times. I think all women in public life of any kind, even if you're just sort of preaching in a local church relatively regularly, through to, you've got a public facing role, all women face more verbal onslaught and criticism in our cultural moment than men, including in the church, because that is just what happens. So you're going to come up against misogynistic men in different formats and different phases and stages of life. So for me, sometimes that was, male students, being quite rude or turning up late to sort of just communicate their disrespect for whatever reason, to sort of super aggressive comments after things. So you grow through that, and it's hard to experience. And some of us will experience trolling online. I've definitely experienced that, and threats and all of that. So, they're going to be different degrees for different ones of us. And you grow partly by, I think, realizing and knowing you're not the only one. This is quite a common experience for women and women who lead and speak. It's quite, I don't know if you saw that interaction with Kemi Badenoch, and before she was the leader of the opposition, and David Tennant, the Doctor Who actor, who was like, trying to basically shut her up. Someone needs to close her down. And her response to that was just absolute pure gold. Look it up. So there's that. And then there are sort of catastrophic things. And I don't think everyone experiences, the utterly catastrophic things. So I definitely experienced that when the founder of the organisation that funded the UK organisation I was employed by, the founder was found to have been sexually abusing women in the most horrific way, having been this sort of, what people thought of as this just amazing Christian leader. So you've got all sorts of theological questions, personal questions, as well as then the fight to stand with the women and whistleblowers and, get that sort of investigated properly and not just sort of brushed under the carpet. So there's so many dimensions to it, and, utterly devastating. And then I also had a very kind of traumatic experience myself, where I went through very profound trauma that gave me PTSD and needed to have therapy for that. So I write about quite a lot of this in the book. So I encourage anyone who connects with any of this to read that. But part of the outflow of that has been the ability to become a bit of an advocate and help to other people who are in either abuse crisis situations, where they're a survivor of horrific abuse, whether that's sexual abuse or spiritual abuse, and sort of help a bit, including in advocacy, to get sort of some of the things that have ended up being published, to get some of those investigations happening and have a role. Because one of the things that can happen if you're the primary victim is that you've tried to speak up, but you've been shut down, and you need help. You need someone else to believe you and sort of stand with you. Yes, there are lots of dimensions to that. But again, one of the things that has been striking to me is that what you think could finish you, like not quite end your life, but maybe sort of end you in a very fundamental way, because it's just so devastating, and that kind of mental health implications are so massive. that God is a God of redemption and actually can turn some of those hideous things, including the worst of all, when people have done these things in the name of God and in the church, that God can even turn some of that for the good of others and for redemptive purpose in other situations. And that has definitely been part of my story, to be able to sort of help others, find and use my voice in a different way in this advocacy space.
That's very encouraging, because I do think that's part of, as women, it's not just the public speaking, but it's the speaking up for each other and the helping each other find a voice. So I do really appreciate that you found your voice in the book and are helping others to find our voice, to keep speaking out, and then to also, when life throws all junk at us, to keep persevering and find that voice, that even though it's changed, find that voice later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So people can pick up your book at all good bookshops. It's called Lead Like the Real You. And you've also, as you said, you've got the Mary Advent as well.
Yeah, I'll show that one to you as well. This is called Mary's Voice, and it's got amazing art in it every day. It's kind of Advent reflection.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, nice. It's really beautiful. It's a lovely book. Starts on the 1st of December, and it sort of re-centers the voice of the Christian faith's most important female witness, who we've often just sort of imagined in a very kind of static role, stuck forever in that moment with a fat baby on her hip. Actually, Mary is, a really central figure in the New Testament. So obviously it points really to Jesus, but it is also about women's voices, funny enough. So this has ended up being a bit of a theme for me.
A bit of a theme for you.
Last couple of years.
Well, I think it's a theme that needs talking about, so do appreciate your writing and sharing with us, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amy. Roots is committed to resourcing you as a preacher and leader. We offer Bible notes on the lectionary passages, sermon starters, and commentary on the weekly passages, where you can find the intersection between scripture and the news and popular culture. You can find all this on our website, under the Week in Focus section. In each issue, we publish articles exploring important issues in leadership, theology, and ministry, helping you to feel supported, to find your voice, and to keep growing. Visit rootsforchurches.com to find all these resources and take out a free trial. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it. Together, we can grow.